Second scenario is more of the distributors we interviewed who said, yeah, this may happen, but it's going to be so slow you barely see all of this. These are the people who say, look, the overriding force here is going to be growth is not going to be terrific. It's going to be slow. A lot of the other stuff you're talking about, consultatives and all that, it'll happen, but you know what? These things happen slowly. The economy is not going to grow that fast. A lot of the demographic stuff you talked about may happen, but it's over a very long period of time. And you know what? We think millennials will adapt to the current way of doing business rather than us having to adapt to the way millennials want to do business. They're going to get on board with, you know, the way that we currently do things today. And so the strategy over here is, I don't want to say status quo, but it's, you know, broaden your contacts and your customers to make them more loyal. So make sure that you're talking to all the buyers and your customers. Focus on those in a modest growth environment. You've got to put more emphasis on the fast growing areas. Yeah, e-commerce and data analytics investments, but at a much more measured pace, not at the same pace as in the first scenario, so kind of incrementally. Same with services, just try out selling some services, but don't jump into that. Focus more on sales force retention. Things aren't going to change that much, but there's still some impact of millennials wanting to jump jobs. And make sure that, you know, you don't jump into data analytics, but what you really want to look for in your data, because it is slow growth environment, is where are the higher margin, not only the higher growth, but the higher margin areas. So it's a squeeze out as much growth and margin as we can in an otherwise modest economy and an otherwise relatively slow changing economy. So quite different than scenario one. Scenario two is a whole demographics and millennial scenario. So it doesn't say that there won't be consultative selling necessary or all of that, but what it focuses on says the driving factor is going to be all these changing demographics at all levels, at our customer level, at our sales force level, even at our supplier level. So it says, hey, yeah, a lot more attention on employee recognition and praise, a lot more technical training because we got younger people with mentorships, flexibility in the sales positions, as you know, Scott was talking about, moving them around. You know, a lot more investment in mobile technology and data-rich technology because the millennials want those tools. Not only our salespeople, millennials, but the customers are going to want those tools. So this is much more around adapting your sales organization to based on that the driving factor in this scenario is the demographics. So it's not opposed to the consultative selling scenario. It just says that will happen, but it's not going to be the biggest factor driving the sales model. And the last one, oops, did I skip one? Salesforce, slow steady, demographics, millennials. I think I mislabeled this one. This one is the technology scenario. Sorry about that. So this one is, the fourth one is a technology and e-commerce scenario. This one says, hey, you know, the initial idea we did this whole project was to look at, you know, is e-commerce going to drive the future of the sales force? And this scenario says, absolutely, that's what's going to drive it. So it's a small percentage of our business today, but you know, based on our customers being younger, based on technology getting easier, based on a lot more content being available from manufacturers, et cetera, what's really going to drive the sales force is we're going to need a lot fewer salespeople. Well, we may need a lot fewer salespeople. Again, distributors are very, you know, of both minds here. But the main thing is that we are going to probably lose some sales internally to our own website, but that we may lose sales to other types of companies, alternative channels, Amazon, Grainger, those types of people, bigger companies who are more web savvy than we are. And so this may not be the most positive scenario, but it's one that says technology is going to drive business away from a field sales model to a web inside sales model, and perhaps even other companies. So this one is the reverse of the previous one, which says invest heavily in e-commerce and analyzing our data. Make sure you've got good data. Make sure that you've got good technology, linking your remaining field salespeople to that technology so that they're, you know, getting the clear access to that. focus more on maybe your inside salespeople and a career path for them, because they might be more important than your field salespeople. And make sure that you're wrapping services around your commodities so that customers don't, if they're buying on the web, they don't necessarily recognize your differentiation, so you got to wrap something around it. So you want to talk about ways that, oh, look, our website's better, our other technologies are better, so that they don't defect and just go get 3 bids all the time, that they say, no, I want to buy from you. And look at field sales productivity tools, because the fewer field salespeople you have mean they got to cover more customers. So the last thing before I open this up for a little bit of Q&A is just, I promised some signposts to watch, because we all remember the Yogi Berra quote. It's tough to make predictions. We don't know which of these scenarios is going to happen. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future, said Yogi Berra. So some of the signposts that we think are important to watch are obviously some of the economic signposts. So do track what's going on both in the industry and the overall macro economy. Look at new products as a percentage of your sales. So if you start seeing that new products are a higher and higher percentage of your sales, that's probably the consultative scenario that's happening. Look at adoption of Internet of Things by your customers. That's another implication that the sophistication complexity scenarios, scenario number 1, is happening. Look at your demographic shifts. Are you in fact experiencing a Gen X gap, or are you able to replace your retiring salespeople? So if you see this gap happening, if you see it happening at your customers and at your level, if you see your customers saying, I want a lot more mobile technology, if you're seeing a very high percentage of millennials in your sales organization, it says maybe that scenario is happening. Some of the other things here is look at your website data. If you see your sales going up, if you see your visits going up, if you see people clicking around, so analyze all of that. That might say it's the last scenario. And look at what your ERP vendors are offering. If they're coming out with a lot of new tools, so we talked about like sales enablement, we talked about some mobile applications, et cetera, that might say the last scenario, the technology scenario is happening. Okay, so the whole idea with these scenarios is not that any one of these will come true, but that we need to look at all 4 of them and track them. And the idea is don't get locked into a Salesforce model quite yet, because we're in the middle of a lot of diverse change. And so the whole idea here is to embrace the unknown and track it and watch these things as they spill out, and then decide what your Salesforce model is going to be. All right, so we're going to open for Q&A. We've got, just 2 minutes left. Yes, all right, let me just go back over those again, because I had a title wrong. The first one is a sophisticated scenario. The second is slow and steady. The third one is it's going to be what's going on with the demographics and the emergence of millennials in your sales organization. And the fourth one is technology, even though I mislabeled it. All right, a couple other questions about or observations about where the sales force is going in the future. First session, coffee hasn't kicked in yet? Yeah, question back there.
How many distributors are supplying their sales force with mobile technology to help their sales reps sell more?
So this is a guess. The question was how many distributors are equipping their sales forces with mobile technology other than just giving them a mobile phone? You mean like with some type of app?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Tablets.
Of the people who are distributors, how many of you, so is it just have the hardware or some kind of specialized app on that hardware?
I'd say the app to help them sell more.
How many of those of you who are distributors, how many people have some, well, I think we only said 2, right? How many people have some sort of specialized app? 3, 4, 5, 6 out of, and how many people are distributors in the room? So it looks like maybe a half to, a little more than a half maybe. But my guess would be that's about right. So I think, people have been developing apps for only a handful of years, but at least one app I'd say that's about right. About half have at least an app. My expectation in 5 years, particularly under the last scenario, the technology scenario, which is mislabeled here, is that it'll be close to 100% will have mobile-enabled apps that either they and or their manufacturers have given them to use. Under this scenario, I think it will be everywhere. But today, I'd say about half would be my guess, but I don't have exact data on that. Other questions before we wrap up? Observations. Just a quick guess, or how many people think that the main scenario is going to be the first one, the complexity, consultative selling scenario? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. How many think it is going to be it's going to stay the same roughly scenario? Oh, come on, there's no one who thinks, all right. How many people think it's going to be driven by demographic changes in millennials? A little bit more. And how many people think it's going to be driven by technology? Well, that's a good split. So we'll leave out the stay the same then, but I'd say it's an equal split between those three. All right, we got to wrap up, guys. Thank you very much for your attention. I know going through the sausage making can be a little tedious, but we got to the end and hopefully gave you some good scenarios to think about for your sales force. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, guys.